Chapter 12, A few pages of my diary. How should I start? In this diary, where I have often relieved myself and expressed my feelings in the hardest moments, I have rarely had so much difficulty finding the right words to describe what I feel. My father always told me that it was best to remember where we came from, return to the starting point and go through your mind every step of the way led you to the point where you are in the present, in order to understand how you got here, you to understand your mistakes, and then maybe, just maybe, not to repeat them in the future and find a better way. I think it is very appropriate that I remember my father's words because the end of him was the beginning of my own tragedy. Therefore, tonight I will begin by remembering him. They say that a mother is God for any child, and I agree, but how to describe what a good and loving father is to a girl? My father was my world, my universe, my first boyfriend, my playmate, my superhero, everything. He was absolutely everything to me. But one day the darkness engulfed him, absorbed him. The man who returned from distant lands, who came from fighting in a war that I only knew from the television news and movies, that man was no longer the father I met. His soul was broken and there was no way to repair it. I knew, and what is worse, he knew, that night when I was drunk and in the middle of an argument with my mother was about to hit her, and when I stepped in to avoid it, he saw in my eyes full of tears the wound he had caused me, and I knew that it had hurt him more than me. It would not be long before another terrible night he lost his life on the asphalt when alcohol finally ceased to be his inseparable friend to become his executioner. And then the darkness began to invade me, just as I was becoming from girl to woman. I was angry with the whole world. I hated my father, I hated my mother, I hated every person, I hated myself. There were not enough people in the world to blame them for my misfortune, and crazed by my own pain I ignored the pain of my mother and my sister. I was too immature and too ignorant to understand that I was not the center of the universe, and however great the pain, it will always be mitigated, if we allow compassion to flow between us and those we love, and on the contrary, it will be harder and more bleeding if we feed it with rancor. And then fate put in my way a bad person. I met a boy, a bad boy. Thinking about my past, I must recognize to myself that it was quite evident to see what kind of scum he was. He was the stereotype of boys that mothers do not want to see next to their teenage daughters. An arrogant boy, hooligan, aggressive, but also a handsome, hot guy, who knew how to be nice when it suited him, that always had the right words in his mouth to seduce a girl, who seducing you with his gaze, and he made you horny with his macho virility, with his false audacity. A boy who had a reputation as a womanizer, like my friends never tired of reminding me. But obviously I was very stupid and absolutely blind, but I must also say in my defense, that I felt alone and my self-esteem was not exactly high. That's why when one of the most desired boys of my school and my neighborhood, one of the popular boys, put his eyes on me, I felt very lucky, I felt beautiful and valued, and that's not a small thing for a girl of 16 years. And after the death of my father, I felt that life was once again good to me when I felt loved, when I lived the fantasy of the first love. Of course, at that time I was a virgin, and I was afraid of the first time. But one of the things that convinced me that this boy loved me and had good intentions with me is that he did not hurry things, that he did not press me to take me to bed too quickly, although he was subtly working to break down my barriers, and him to get what he wanted. It is incredible, as a feeling that once seemed so great and sublime, later you contemplate it as something ridiculous and absurd, irritatingly petty. I needed maturity to know how to differentiate true love from a silly infatuation mixed with desire, stimulated by the adolescent hormones of an innocent girl. The fact is that I was an easy victim at the end, and I gave my virginity to that moron. Now I remember my first time with shame, disgust, regret and an unpleasant feeling of fear and pain when I remembered what my senses perceived, what my body experienced in those moments. Because, although in the preliminaries he tried to be nice or charming to overcome my last resistance, in the act he was not exactly gentle or kind, and he hurt me, he did me more damage than necessary. That's why I remember it as a painful experience, dirty and unpleasant, very unpleasant. But I did not know that the worst was yet to come. Because the bastard that a silly girl once wanted to see as a charming prince was actually a damn coward and scoundrel who had bet with his friends that I was a virgin and that he was going to steal my virginity. And to prove it, he filmed with a hidden camera my first time and then showed it to his friends. That video that has been the most painful and shameful humiliation I have suffered in my life, an infamous humiliation that damaged me emotionally in a way that I doubt anyone will be able to understand. I have seen that video, and those images are a psychological torture that still tortures me, that still come to my mind without being evoked at the most inopportune moments and in some nightmares. Those grotesque images that dehumanize me and reduced me to an object, a mere toy, that hurt my modesty and attack my femininity, those images that make vulgar and dirty the moment that should have been one of the most beautiful and memorable of my life. Images as obscene like that of the bastard showing the camera the dirty sheets as a war trophy. Why do I hurt myself remembering something so horrible? Because even now, so much later, I need to expel it from my body, and because it was only the beginning of my nightmare. Because I faced that coward when I knew, and in revenge, he distributed that video on social networks so that all my classmates from high school saw it. Bullying is a buzzword, perhaps for most. It is simply a word they sometimes hear in the media, in sad and often tragic news. But only for those who have suffered it is a terrifying and painful reality, a dark reality like a night without moon, stars, or hope. Like a black fog that covers you and plunges you into pain, sometimes physical, more often psychological. Every time the girls in the school laughed at me cruelly and offended me, every time the boys degraded me by treating me like an easy girl, each time both girls and boys called me a whore, a slut, a bitch, and other rude and hurtful things, the suffering burned me inside, sinking me in the anguish and the shame, producing the most oppressive and maddening depression. My head was a horrible place to live, a lugubrious place inhabited by dirty, terrifying and horrible monsters, those monsters that were the thoughts that came to life with every insult and every humiliation, with every vulgar expression that wanted to dynamite my dignity. Those voices chased me, day and night. Those voices full of hate, mockery, and contempt, those voices that nailed in my soul like daggers. Those voices calling me bitch, whore, accompanied by obscene laughter. In addition, the insulting and mocking messages in social networks, accompanied by obscene and hurtful images, that continuous harassment in all social networks that magnifies bullying to terrible extremes. Will those girls and those guys ever know the damage they did to me? When the years go by and they have their own children, would they think of what they would feel if did to their children what they did to me? I would like to believe that one day, at least for a few minutes, they will feel bad remembering what they did to me, but unfortunately, I doubt it. Those voices were so persistent and mortifying, tormented me with such viciousness, undermining my self-esteem and my sanity, that I ended up hating myself and despising myself, giving reason to my stalkers, feeling that I deserved everything that happened to me. I cried, every day and at all times, until my eyes almost bled from crying. I refused to eat, and that's why I lost a lot of weight and I got sick, coming to faint a couple of times. Meanwhile, the video was still shared, and inevitably my mother had to know it. Never in my life have I felt more guilty and ashamed than the day I saw the pain and shame in my mother's eyes filled with tears, the day I could see how she suffered for me, but at the same time, she was disappointed in me stupid behavior. That day I wanted to die, really. My mother denounced the boy and the police, and I had to suffer the shame of testifying before the detectives and the prosecutor, although I did not have to do it again in the trial because the case was closed with an agreement, for which he avoided the bigger sentence. But my calvary continued, the harassment in the school did not stop, and my hell was getting bigger. And that's how the day came when I almost finished with my life. I was in the bathroom, alone. My mother had to take my sister to the doctor for a bad cold. And I felt tempted to materialize that horrible thought. I thought to cut my veins. But I could not. The memory of my father came to my mind, his face and his voice, and I also remembered the pain of my mother and my own. I remembered our suffering when he died. I knew I could not do it, that I could not do that to my mother, not again. She did not deserve to lose tragically someone she loved, once again. And I remembered how my father said that running away was never the solution, that the easy and cowardly way out was not really a solution, it was just the fastest route to a bigger pain. But above all, I knew that I could not be alone, wherever I was, that I can only be with those I love because I fear loneliness more than death itself, and while someone loved me I desperately need to be with those I love. Since then, the healing power of the love of those who love me has restored peace to me, although in my life there have been other reasons to suffer, such as my mother's illness. I have matured, I have understood that by living in this world we are responsible not only for our life but also for that of others, of those we love. I have serenity, I have strength, but also lives in my soul the sadness caused by my experience and my fear of falling in love, my refusal to love another man. Because I am afraid to trust my body and my soul to another man, because giving your heart to another person is putting your life in that person's hands, depending on him, giving him the power to hurt you and destroy you. But now in my life, there is another man. A man who came into my life in the strangest and most intimidating way, a man who could only arouse misgivings in me at the beginning. But things have changed in an extraordinary way, and what I never wanted to happen has happened. I have fallen in love with him. I cannot explain it. Obviously, he is handsome, hot, although he is much older than me. But it's not about that, because after my traumatic experience I'd have to be very stupid to fall in love with someone just because it can excite my hormones. Nor is it about his money, because we would be talking about interest and not love. It is something much deeper and therefore more frightening. His presence excites me and disturbs me at the same time. My heart speeds up and my body responds to him in a way that I did not think would be possible in this world, even though we have not had intimacy as a couple. He has absorbed my mind, has gotten into my head, and I cannot stop thinking about him. But, above all, it is what I feel when I see him to the eyes. In those green eyes I see that darkness that moves me and frightens me, that awakens my compassion because I know the story of the painful tragedy that it is behind, but at the same time awakens my fear of what it can bring. But that darkness so similar to mine makes me believe that maybe, just maybe, fate has united two people who can love each other because they have similar emotional wounds, because they have survived an emotional hell. But, even so, I'm still afraid, but I've decided not to run away. Whatever happens, I will not try to flee again, I'll just live, and that's enough. Thank you for listening to me, my dear diary.